Group of senators voted to pass a resolution put forth by Virginia Senator Tim Kaine to limit future military force in Venezuela without congressional approval. 5 Republicans voted with Democrats to limit the president's powers less than a week after Nicolas Maduro was captured. Those in support say there needs to be a debate on this military operation.
What you will likely see next week is a vote on a motion to proceed, which we would expect simple majority, similar vote to today, and then a debate. Finally, after months, about this military operation, the whole thing, including where it's going in Venezuela and possibly in other nations.
On the flip side, Republicans who voted against the resolution say it puts America's safety at risk.
I respect their decision. They're dead wrong. There'll be plenty of people here to make sure this doesn't happen. They're going to own screwing up the best chance we've ever had to liberate the people of Venezuela and make our...
Now imagine being a U.S. Senator. You've been elected by your constituents, sworn to uphold the Constitution, and here you are casting a vote on a war powers resolution. This vote is really about whether the president should need to come to Congress before ramping up military actions overseas. It's not a radical idea. It's about a fundamental part of how Congress asserts its authority on matters of war, a power that the Constitution clearly gives to the legislative branch rather than the executive. You cast your vote with your conscience, believing you're doing what's right according to the Constitution. Then your phone rings, and it's the president, furious about your vote. But he isn't calling to debate the constitutional points or suggest an alternate policy. Instead, he tells you that he plans to back a primary challenger against you, warning you that you probably won't hold office again. And that's not just some imaginary scenario. 5 Republican senators, Josh Hawley, Lisa Murkowski, Rand Paul, Susan Collins, and Tom Tillis, face this exact situation after voting with the Democrats to push forward this war powers resolution that makes Trump ask Congress for approval. So, here's the scoop. The U.S. Senate just took a significant step by advancing a resolution aimed at limiting President Trump's ability to escalate military action in Venezuela. It's pretty wild when you think about it. This move came after some tense moments, as Trump reportedly made a few angry phone calls, insisting that lawmakers who dared to challenge him should never hold office again. His accusations included claims that they were undermining not just American self-defense, but also his authority as commander-in-chief. It's ironic, given they were simply using their constitutional rights to oversee the executive branch's war-making powers. And if that drama with the senators wasn't enough, the Justice Department decided to stir the pot even more. They put up a massive, stern, black-and-white image of Trump right outside their headquarters, paired with the slogan, "Make America Safe Again." I mean, can you imagine? The Justice Department, an institution meant to be independent of any specific president's agenda, showcasing the president's face like that. Critics were quick to point out how unprecedented this was in modern American history, drawing parallels to authoritarian regimes where the leader's face is synonymous with the justice system. Between the threats aimed at Republican senators and that striking banner from the DOJ, it paints a picture of a president pushing boundaries that many in his own party are finding uncomfortable. It's quite a ride, isn't it?
The U.S. Senate just advanced a resolution that would limit President Trump's ability to conduct further attacks against Venezuela. Democrats and 5 Republicans voted in favor of the war powers resolution. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is live for us on Capitol Hill. And Nate, I mean, this is sending a big message to the Trump administration. But what comes next?
Yeah, Holly, but this is pretty much exactly that. It's a message to the Trump administration. This is not something that will really limit the ability for President Trump to continue U.S. involvement in Venezuela in the southern hemisphere. There's a lot of questions about just exactly what this will accomplish, other than sending that message to the White House that not just Democrats, but a handful of Republicans are, have concerns about what direction this conflict could be going, as the Trump administration has repeatedly refused to rule out any further use of military force on the ground in Venezuela as they look to set up a government that has...
So now the big question is, what's next? So let's break down what happened with the war powers vote, as it really helps explain why Trump's reaction was such a big deal. This resolution was all about Venezuela. The Trump administration had been ramping up pressure on Venezuela's government, which got people worried that the United States might be heading toward military conflict there. And the big question was whether there was any congressional backing for that kind of action. You see, Congress has the power to declare war, and the War Powers Act of 1973 was created to keep presidents from committing American forces to military action without approval from Congress. This came from the lessons learned during the Vietnam War, where presidents often escalated conflicts without proper oversight from the legislative branch. So, when 5 Republican senators decided to join Democrats to push the War Powers Resolution forward, they were really saying, we're not letting this turn into another military commitment without Congress having a say. It was pretty notable because one of those senators was Josh Hawley, who's generally a Trump ally. Then you have Rand Paul, who consistently speaks out against giving too much power to the executive when it comes to military authority. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski have also shown a willingness to go against their party if they believe constitutional principles are in jeopardy. Todd Young from Indiana was along for the ride too. The thing is, these senators aren't outsiders or those who oppose Trump at every turn. Many of them have backed significant parts of Trump's agenda in the past. They chose to vote for this specific measure because they thought it was the right thing to do in terms of upholding the Constitution. The whole situation is pretty telling about Trump's view on Congress and the Constitution. It's not exactly what the framers envisioned when they created Article 1. Now, moving on to that DOJ banner, despite all the wild and controversial news happening, seeing the president's face at the entrance of the United States Department of Justice stirred quite a reaction. It's interesting because this isn't just about politics. It really struck a chord across different viewpoints. The Department of Justice is meant to operate independently, serving as a law enforcement agency that upholds the Constitution. This independence isn't just a nice little tradition that can be ignored when it's convenient for the political elite. It's actually a core principle of how American law should work. The government's enforcement powers are supposed to be exercised on behalf of the law rather than the whims of whoever is occupying the Oval Office at any given time. The Attorney General is there to uphold the law, and the prosecutors making decisions inside the DOJ should be following evidence and legal standards, without regard to whether someone is a friend of the administration or not. This principle is pretty clear. So when you see the president's face alongside his campaign slogan hanging outside the DOJ headquarters, it communicates something alarming. The department appears to be serving him, not the people or the law. Legal experts who've dedicated their lives to studying or working in federal law enforcement have said they've never witnessed anything like this before. The comparisons being drawn to authoritarian regimes are not taken lightly. It really raises eyebrows when leaders' images are used to signal that institutions serve the leader rather than justice. The fact that this banner comes at a time when Trump is openly threatening Republican senators over a constitutional war powers measure just makes the image and its implications even more striking. It's interesting how 2 different stories are really tied together, showing a bigger issue at play. We're talking about some unsettling moves involving threats to senators and the Department of Justice. These aren't just random events happening side by side. They reflect the same troubling trend. The president seems intent on blurring the lines between his own authority and the institutions that are supposed to operate independently. When he threatens senators for voting based on their constitutional beliefs, it mixes the idea of loyalty to him with loyalty to the law. Similarly, when he puts his face on the Department of Justice, it creates a confusing overlap between his political brand and the federal law enforcement institution. What's surprising is that the alarm bells aren't just ringing among Democrats. A good number of responses have come from within the Republican Party itself, including voices who have supported Trump on policy. They're beginning to step back and reassess what he's doing to American governmental institutions, and it's leaving them feeling genuinely uneasy about the direction things are heading. Let's dive deeper into both of these stories and the broader pattern they're a part of. While each individual incident is important, what's essential to notice is the overall trend they highlight regarding the state of American political and legal institutions under this administration. For instance, it's crucial to look closely at the war powers confrontation, especially with 5 senators voting for that resolution and the backlash that followed. This suggests that there are deeper fractures emerging within the Republican Party concerning Trump's military and foreign policy stance. In earlier discussions, we highlighted media figures from the MAGA world, like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Matt Walsh, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who publicly broke away from Trump over the Iran war, claiming it was a betrayal of American first principles. However, what's unfolding in the Senate represents something with a different and significant impact. When media figures distance themselves from Trump, the consequences are mainly about reputation and political standing. It shifts the narrative and affects the information landscape, but the Senate's dissent is about something much deeper. When U.S. senators decide to break away from Trump on a war powers vote, it really shows how the government is set up to work. It's a clear instance of the legislative branch flexing its constitutional muscles, even if the executive branch isn't happy about it. That's what the separation of powers is all about. When senators feel the president is overstepping, they're supposed to act. What's interesting is Trump's response. Instead of laying out a solid policy argument or a legal defense for his stance, he fired off angry phone calls and posted publicly, declaring that those senators shouldn't ever hold office again. This tells us a lot about how he views the balance of power between the branches. He's not arguing that they're wrong on the law. Rather, he's calling them disloyal. He's treating a constitutional vote like a personal betrayal, insisting that loyalty to him should come before any constitutional duties those senators have. It's no surprise that some Republican senators are starting to push back against this idea. In fact, a report highlighted concerns that Trump's growing demand for personal loyalty and his handling of the war, along with his slipping poll numbers, could hurt their chances to retain the Senate in future elections. This situation raises important questions. The breaking point for these Republican senators might not be a matter of principle as much as it is about politics. They're weighing the risk of following Trump without question against their own political survival. Some senators might vote for the war powers resolution because they genuinely believe in it, while others might be realizing that the costs of sticking by Trump are starting to outweigh the benefits. Regardless of why they vote this way, the result is the same. Senators from Trump's own party are stepping up to put limits on his military authority. There's something really striking going on with the Department of Justice lately, and it's worth diving into. So picture this. A massive banner hangs outside the DOJ's main building in Washington, D.C., featuring a black and white portrait of Trump. It's not your typical campaign image. This one has that serious, high-contrast look you'd expect from formal leader portraits. Alongside it, there's the slogan, "Make America Safe Again." Now, let's be clear. That's not something you'd associate with the DOJ's official mission or any legal standards. It's actually a twist on Trump's own political brand that plays off his famous "Make America Great Again" slogan. By putting his image on the Justice Department's headquarters, it sends a pretty bold message. It almost shouts ownership, as if saying the DOJ and Trump are one and the same, making it clear that keeping America safe is intricately tied to his political identity. Legal experts have weighed in on this too, expressing that they've never witnessed anything like it in American legal history. Sure, the DOJ has had its symbols and formal imagery that reflect its serious and independent role, but displaying the face of the sitting president like this, it's just not something we've seen before. What makes this even more significant is how it highlights a certain interpretation of the DOJ's function, particularly during Trump's second term. We've seen plenty of instances where the DOJ has been under pressure to bend or ignore court orders, like in deportation cases. There were even Trump's personal lawyers taking up senior positions within the department and the dismissal of a career attorney for simply telling the truth in front of a federal judge. All of these actions echo the same point that the banner visually conveys. The DOJ seems to be operating primarily in service of Trump's interests and his agenda. Let's take a moment to think about how a leader's image gets tied into law enforcement and what that really means. When a government displays a leader's face on institutions meant to uphold justice, it starts to draw parallels with authoritarian regimes. It's honestly hard to believe we're seeing this kind of thing outside of those contexts. In those types of governments, merging the leader's identity with the justice system isn't just a coincidence. It's intentional and serves a purpose. It sends a clear message to everyone involved, citizens, law enforcement, judges, that justice is all about the leader's wishes rather than any independent legal standards. This also influences those working within those institutions, as it directs whose loyalty they should show and whose interests they should prioritize. It implies that protection under the law is not a given right, but something you only get based on your relationship with the leader. Now, don't get me wrong. The United States isn't an authoritarian state. Our institutions are still there, doing their jobs, albeit not without flaws and under quite a bit of strain. Courts continue to hand down rulings against the administration, senators still vote against the president's ideas, and whistleblowers persist in raising alarms. However, what makes you stop and think is the message coming from things like the banner at the Department of Justice. It raises an important question. Are these seemingly small moves part of a larger shift toward a governance style where seeing the leader's face on the Justice Building isn't surprising, but rather the norm? It really makes you wonder if the institutions meant to push back against this drift will be able to stand firm in the long run. Now, connecting the dots here, the threats directed at senators and that DOJ banner point to one big issue. Trump is working to blur the lines between himself and the institutions that should operate independently. When he threatens senators who dare to vote based on their constitutional judgment, he's pushing to diminish the independence of the legislative branch. I've been thinking about how when Trump used his image as a stamp on the Department of Justice, he effectively blurred the lines between federal law enforcement and his personal brand. It's surprising how much this shows his approach to governance. Institutions are meant to serve him, and any deviation from his wishes is seen as disloyalty rather than legitimate criticism. Interestingly, this isn't just bothering his opponents. Some Republicans who previously supported him and voted for him are now stepping back to reassess what they really signed up for. Let's connect the dots here, because the mix of Trump threatening senators and plastering his face on the DOJ isn't just a random series of political moves. It reveals a deeper truth about how his administration functions and what's happening within the Republican Party and federal government. Now, the reaction to Republican senators voting on a war powers resolution and Trump's angry response is more significant than it seems at first glance. People usually think Trump has a tight grip on the Republican Party, where no one dares to cross him for fear of losing his endorsement or facing backlash from his loyal base. For most of his political career, that belief held up pretty well. But what I'm seeing now is a change brewing within the GOP. The war powers vote marks one of those early signs of this shift. We've already noticed it with the MAGA media pushing back against him regarding Iran, and a handful of Republican senators deciding to retreat instead of riding on his military record. Even former loyalists are now publicly questioning things. This vote brings a clear example of Republican senators realizing that certain issues, particularly around military authority and constitutional questions, are serious enough to warrant a rethink of their allegiance to Trump. You know, there's something interesting happening with a few senators. They appear to be getting bold enough to set aside any fear of Trump's anger and lean into their own judgment. When that mindset spreads among multiple senators on various issues, it really starts to shift the political landscape, creating real consequences for Trump's legislative power and the limits he encounters moving forward. Sure, the threats and frustration are genuine, but here's the twist. If enough of these senators decide that the principles laid out in the Constitution matter more than the political fallout, suddenly those threats lose their power. Then there's the whole situation with the Department of Justice and the banner that's been causing such a stir. It's not just about the shock of seeing the president's face plastered on the DOJ building. It really signifies something deeper. The independence of the DOJ from the president's personal brand isn't merely a nicety. It's essential for the credibility of federal law enforcement. When the DOJ goes after someone, it's crucial that the public trusts that those decisions are driven by evidence and the law, not by whatever is prevailing in the White House. By putting the president's image and campaign slogan on the DOJ building, we end up sending a clear message that undermines that credibility. It suggests to everyone, defendants, witnesses, jurors, foreign nations, and the American public, that this institution is now closely tied to a specific political brand. Once that connection is established so blatantly, it opens the door to questioning the independence of every future decision made by the DOJ. Defense attorneys will definitely bring it up, critics of particular prosecutions will use it as ammo, and foreign governments will keep it in mind when assessing the reliability of the American legal system. That banner isn't just a matter of poor optics. It fundamentally weakens the institutional credibility that is vital for effective federal law enforcement. And once that credibility is damaged, it doesn't just bounce back when a new administration comes in. Rebuilding that trust takes a significant amount of time, effort, and a solid commitment to independence, something that this banner has clearly put into jeopardy. Looking at the current landscape, it's clear that things are shifting, especially within the Republican Senate caucus. 5 senators recently broke ranks and voted against Trump on the war powers resolution, and now more of them seem concerned about how unconditional loyalty could affect their standing in future elections. Adding to the tension, the MAGA media is stirring things up regarding the Iran war, creating a scenario where even Trump's former supporters are starting to criticize him. To top it all off, the Supreme Court dealt him a blow by ruling 6-3 against his tariff authority, and 2 of those justices were actually his own appointees. On another front, a whistleblower from the Department of Justice has officially filed a sworn complaint pointing to illegal orders being given. All of this is happening at once, and what's Trump's reaction? He's escalating things across the board. He's ramping up pressure on those senators, making bolder claims over the Department of Justice, and using every tactic he can find to demand loyalty and punish dissent. This pattern is becoming more consistent and intensifying, suggesting that confrontations between Trump and the key institutions, those that ideally operate independently from his whims, are not a question of if, but rather when. The real question now is whether these institutions, the courts, the Senate, the civil servants in the executive branch, and the legal professionals who are held to ethical standards, will stand firm for long enough to uphold the checks and balances that our system relies on. So far, the 5 senators who oppose Trump held their ground, just like the DOJ attorney who spoke the truth to a judge and the 6 justices who overturned those tariffs. Now it's a matter of who will be next to hold their ground, and whether the pressure Trump applies will push them to choose compliance over resistance. This is the narrative that will shape the rest of his term, and it's unfolding quickly.